The bullet shattered the wooden beam above Darla Zimmerman's head, sending splinters raining down into her auburn hair as she pressed herself against the back wall of the mercantile, her heart hammering so hard she could hear nothing else but the thunder of blood in her ears. It was the spring of 1881 in Redding, California, and what had started as an ordinary Tuesday afternoon had turned into a nightmare when the Dawson gang rode into town, with vengeance on their minds and whiskey courage in their bellies. Darla had been inside Harper's mercantile, selecting fabric for a new dress, when the first gunshots cracked through the warm air. She had watched through the front window as people scattered like startled birds, diving into doorways and behind water troughs. The gang had been hunting for Sheriff Morrison, who had killed their brother in a shootout 2 weeks prior, but the sheriff was out of town, and the Dawson boys were not the patient sort. Now Darla found herself trapped in the back storage room of the mercantile, listening as heavy boots stomped across the wooden floor of the main shop. There were at least 4 of them, maybe 5, and they were working their way through every building on Main Street, looking for anyone who might tell them where the sheriff had gone. The old proprietor, Mr. Harper, had tried to slip out the back door 15 minutes ago, and she had heard the sickening thud of fists meeting flesh before he stopped crying out. "Check the back!" a rough voice called out, followed by the scrape of chairs being overturned and the crash of glass breaking. Darla looked around desperately. The small storage room had only one door, the one she had come through, and one window that was barely large enough for a child to squeeze through, positioned high on the wall and covered with iron bars. Crates and barrels surrounded her, stacked haphazardly, smelling of coffee beans and dried tobacco. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and worked as a schoolteacher in Redding. She had never imagined dying in a storage room, shot by outlaws who would not even remember her name. The door handle rattled. Darla held her breath, pressing herself into the narrow space between 2 large crates. Through the gap, she could see the door swing open and a man step inside. He was tall and thin, with a scraggly beard and eyes that looked everywhere at once, predatory and alert. "Nothing back here but supplies," he called over his shoulder, but he did not leave. Instead, he took another step into the room, his gaze sweeping the shadows. Darla could smell him from where she hid, the stench of unwashed clothes and stale alcohol. Her hand found a heavy glass bottle on the shelf beside her, and she gripped it tightly, knowing that if he found her, it would be her only defense. "Search it proper, Cole," another voice barked from the main room. "That teacher girl was seen coming in here, and she might know where Morrison went." Cole grunted and started moving crates aside. Darla's pulse raced. In another minute, maybe less, he would find her hiding spot. She tightened her grip on the bottle, preparing herself for what she would have to do. She had never struck another person in her life, but fear had a way of changing everything. The crash of the front door being kicked open made Cole spin around. "What the hell? Who are you?" The voice from the main room had lost its confident edge, replaced with something sharp and dangerous. "Name's Elijah Owens," came the reply, calm and steady as a river stone. "And you boys need to ride out of town, now." Darla's eyes widened. She knew that name. Everyone in Redding knew Elijah Owens, though few had actually met him. He was a cattleman who owned a ranch 15 miles north of town, a man who kept to himself and came into Redding maybe once a month for supplies. Word was he had been a soldier during the war, fought for the Union, and had seen things that changed a man. He was 30 years old, broad-shouldered and serious, with dark hair and eyes that looked like they could see straight through you. "This ain't your business, Cowboy," the leader of the gang said. "Unless you want to make it your business, then we can oblige you." "I saw you drag Mr. Harper into the street," Elijah said, his voice still maddeningly calm. "I saw you put a gun to Mrs. Henderson's head to make her talk. I am making it my business." There was a moment of silence, tense and crackling like lightning before a storm. Then the room erupted in chaos. Gunshots exploded, deafening in the enclosed space. Darla clapped her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. She heard men shouting, furniture crashing, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. It seemed to last forever, though it could not have been more than 30 seconds. When the noise finally stopped, Darla remained frozen, too terrified to move. Her ears rang painfully, and she could smell gunpowder thick in the air. "Miss Zimmerman?" The voice was closer now, just outside the storage room. "If you are in there, it is safe to come out." Darla's legs trembled as she emerged from behind the crates. Cole lay on the floor just inside the doorway, clutching his shoulder and groaning. In the main room, 3 other men were down, and a 5th was running out the front door, disappearing into the street. Elijah Owens stood in the center of the mercantile, his revolver still in his hand, smoke curling from the barrel. He had a cut above his left eyebrow, blood trickling down the side of his face, but otherwise appeared unhurt. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Darla had seen him from a distance before, riding through town on his black stallion, but up close he was even more striking. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with strong features and a jaw that looked carved from granite. But it was his eyes that held her attention, dark brown and intense, filled with something she could not quite name. "Are you hurt?" he asked, holstering his gun and taking a step toward her. Darla shook her head, finding her voice. No, I am fine. They did not find me." "Good." He glanced at Cole, who was still moaning on the floor, then back at Darla. "We need to get you somewhere safe. The one that ran might come back with reinforcements." "Mr. Harper," Darla said suddenly, remembering. "They heard him. He is outside." Elijah nodded grimly. "I saw. Doc Peterson is with him now. He will live, but he took a beating." The sound of running footsteps made them both turn. 3 townsmen burst through the door, rifles raised, their faces flushed with fear and anger. When they saw Elijah and the downed outlaws, they stopped short. "Owens," one of them breathed. "What happened here?" "The Dawson gang," Elijah replied. "They were tearing the town apart looking for the sheriff. I convinced them to leave." The man's eyes swept over the bodies on the floor. 2 of them were not moving at all. "I would say you did more than convince them." "They did not give me much choice," Elijah said flatly. "You men should round up anyone who is hurt and get them to the doctor. And someone needs to ride out to find Sheriff Morrison. He needs to know what happened." The townsmen nodded and set to work, but Darla noticed the way they looked at Elijah, with a mixture of gratitude and unease. He had saved them, saved her, but there was something about him that made people cautious. Maybe it was the efficiency with which he had handled the outlaws, or maybe it was just the way he carried himself, like a man who had seen too much violence and learned to speak its language fluently. "Miss Zimmerman," Elijah said, turning back to her. "Let me walk you home. The streets are not safe yet." Darla wanted to protest that she was perfectly capable of walking herself home, but the truth was her legs still felt like water, and her hands would not stop shaking. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I would appreciate that." They stepped out into the afternoon sunlight. Main Street looked like a battlefield. Broken glass littered the boardwalk, chairs and tables from the saloon were overturned, and small groups of people clustered together, talking in low, frightened voices. Doc Peterson was kneeling beside Mr. Harper, who sat propped against a post, holding a bloodied cloth to his head. When the old man saw Darla, he raised a shaky hand, and she felt tears prick her eyes. Elijah placed a hand lightly on her elbow, guiding her down the street. His touch was gentle, surprisingly so for a man who had just been in a gunfight. They walked in silence for a minute, passing frightened faces and damaged storefronts. "You were very brave," Darla said finally, glancing up at him. "Coming into the mercantile like that, they would have killed you." "They would have tried," Elijah replied. His jaw was tight, and she could see a muscle working beneath the skin. "But I could not stand by and watch them terrorize innocent people." "Most men would have." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt something shift in her chest. "I am not most men, Miss Zimmerman." No, she thought, he certainly was not. There was something different about Elijah Owens, something that went deeper than his quiet confidence or his skill with a gun. It was in the way he carried himself, in the sadness that lingered at the edges of his eyes, like a man who had lost something precious and never quite recovered. They reached her boarding house, a neat 2-story building with white paint and blue shutters. Mrs. Crawford, the landlady, stood on the porch with several other women, their faces pale with worry. When they saw Darla, they rushed forward, talking all at once. "We heard the shooting," Mrs. Crawford said, gripping Darla's hands. "We were so worried. Are you all right?" "I am fine," Darla assured her. "Mr. Owens saved my life." The women turned their attention to Elijah, and he shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. "I should get back," he said. "Make sure there is no more trouble." "You are hurt," Darla said, noticing the blood on his face. "At least let me clean that cut." He hesitated, and she could see the refusal forming on his lips. "But Mrs. Crawford stepped in. "Nonsense, young man. You saved our Darla. The least we can do is tend to your injury. Come inside." Elijah looked like he wanted to argue, but the combined force of 5 determined women was apparently more than even he could withstand. He followed them into the boarding house, ducking his head slightly to clear the doorframe. The parlor was cozy and feminine, with floral wallpaper and lace curtains. Elijah looked wildly out of place among the delicate furniture and china figurines, like a wolf in a drawing room. Darla directed him to sit on a straight-back chair while she went to fetch water and clean cloths. When she returned, the other women had retreated to give them some privacy, though she could hear them whispering in the next room. She knelt beside Elijah's chair, carefully dabbing at the cut on his forehead. He sat very still, watching her face with an intensity that made her fingers tremble. "This might sting," she warned, applying a bit of alcohol to the cloth. He did not even flinch. Up close she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar on his chin, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He smelled like leather and sage, clean and masculine. Her heart was beating faster than it should, given that the danger had passed. "You have steady hands," he observed. "I suppose that comes from being a teacher." "I teach children, Mr. Owens, not patch up cowboys," Darla replied, a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "But my father was a doctor before he died. I learned a few things from watching him." "I am sorry about your father." "It was a long time ago, 5 years now." She finished cleaning the cut and sat back on her heels, studying her work. "You should be fine. It is not deep." "Thank you." He stood, and the room suddenly felt smaller with him, taking up so much space. "I really should go. The town will need help cleaning up this mess." Darla rose as well, smoothing her skirts. "Mr. Owens, I owe you my life. If you had not come when you did, those men would have found me, and I do not think they would have been gentle." His expression darkened. "You do not owe me anything, Miss Zimmerman. Any decent man would have done the same." "But most men are not decent," she said softly. "Not when it might cost them their lives." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Then Elijah nodded once and turned toward the door. Darla followed him out onto the porch. "Will you come to town again soon?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. Why did she care if he came to town? But Elijah did not seem to find it strange. "I suppose I will. I need to give a statement to the sheriff when he returns, and I should check on Mr. Harper." He paused, his hand on the porch rail. "Perhaps I might call on you sometime, to make sure you have recovered from this ordeal." Darla's heart leaped. "I would like that very much." He smiled then, just a slight curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less burdened. "Good day, Miss Zimmerman." "Good day, Mr. Owens, and thank you again." She watched as he walked down the street toward where his horse was tied, his stride long and confident. Several townspeople stopped him to shake his hand and thank him, but he seemed uncomfortable with the attention, nodding briefly and moving on. He swung up into his saddle with easy grace and rode out of town without looking back. Mrs. Crawford appeared at Darla's elbow. "That is quite a man," she said, watching Elijah disappear down the road. "Handsome, too, if you like the strong, silent type." "I was just thanking him for saving my life," Darla protested, but she could feel her cheeks warming. "Mm-hmm." Mrs. Crawford's eyes twinkled. "And the way he was looking at you had nothing to do with it, I am sure." "He was not looking at me in any particular way." "Child, I am 63 years old, and I have been married twice. I know when a man is smitten, and that cowboy is smitten." She patted Darla's arm. "And unless I miss my guess, you are not entirely immune to his charms either." Darla opened her mouth to deny it, but the words would not come. The truth was, something had happened in that mercantile, something more than just a rescue. When Elijah had looked at her with those dark, intense eyes, she had felt seen in a way she never had before. It was unsettling and thrilling all at once. "Come inside," Mrs. Crawford said gently. "You have had a terrible shock. Let me make you some tea." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Sheriff Morrison returned just before sunset, and the whole town gathered to hear what had happened. The 2 dead outlaws were identified as Cole's brothers, both wanted for robbery and murder. Cole himself and the injured man were hauled off to jail, their wounds tended but their futures grim. The one who had escaped was thought to be heading for the Nevada border, and the sheriff sent a telegram to the marshals in that territory. Darla gave her statement to the sheriff, describing how she had hidden in the storage room and how Elijah had arrived just in time. The sheriff, a weathered man with kind eyes, listened carefully and wrote everything down. "You were lucky Owens came along when he did," he said when she finished. "The Dawson boys have killed before. They would not have hesitated with you." That night, Darla lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling and reliving every moment of the attack. She should have been thinking about how close she had come to death, should have been terrified, but instead, her mind kept returning to Elijah Owens, the calm strength in his voice, the way he had moved through the mercantile like he owned the space, the gentleness of his touch on her elbow. She had been courted before, of course. Redding was a small town, and unmarried women were in short supply. But the men who had shown interest in her had been either too young and foolish or too old and set in their ways. None of them had made her feel the way Elijah had, with just a look and a few words. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She was walking home from the schoolhouse, carrying a stack of primers that needed mending, when a familiar black stallion pulled up beside her. "Miss Zimmerman," Elijah said, touching the brim of his hat. "May I offer you a ride?" Darla looked up at him, shielding her eyes from the late afternoon sun. He looked tired, she thought, like he had not been sleeping well. "That is very kind, but I am not going far." "Then I will walk with you." He dismounted in one smooth motion, taking the reins in one hand. "If you do not mind the company." "I do not mind at all." In fact, her heart was racing just from being near him again. They fell into step together, his horse trailing behind them like a large patient dog. For a moment, neither spoke, and Darla searched for something to say that would not sound foolish. "How is your ranch?" she asked finally. "I imagine all this trouble in town took you away from your work." "The ranch runs itself mostly," Elijah replied. "I have a good foreman and 3 hands who know what they are doing. They can spare me for a few days." "Have you lived here long? I do not recall seeing you before this year." "I bought the property 2 years ago, but I have only recently finished building the house. Before that, I was living in a small cabin on the far end of the property, and I did not come to town much." He glanced at her. "I prefer my own company, usually." "Usually?" she prompted. A faint smile touched his lips. "I am finding that some company is worth seeking out." Darla's cheeks warmed, and she looked down at her boots. "Mr. Owens, are you flirting with me?" "I am trying to," he admitted, "though I fear I am out of practice. It has been a long time since I had reason to." His honesty was disarming. Most men would have played coy or tried to be clever, but Elijah just said what he meant. Darla found she liked that about him. "Well, for someone out of practice, you are doing fine," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. They reached the boarding house too quickly. Darla turned to face him, reluctant to say goodbye. "Would you like to come in for coffee? Mrs. Crawford makes excellent coffee." Elijah hesitated, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes. "I should not. I have been away from the ranch too long already." "Oh," Darla tried to hide her disappointment. "Of course, I understand. But," he continued, "I was wondering if you might consider having dinner with me, tomorrow evening if you are free. There is a restaurant in town, the Golden Eagle. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." Darla's heart soared. "I would love to." 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock, she agreed. He smiled that rare smile again, and she felt like she had won some kind of prize. "Until tomorrow then, Miss Zimmerman." "Darla," she said impulsively. "Please call me Darla." "Darla," he repeated, and the way he said her name, low and careful, sent a shiver down her spine. "I am Elijah." "I know," she said, then blushed. "I mean, everyone knows who you are, after what you did." "What I did was nothing," he said, his expression growing serious. "Anyone would have done the same. But they did not." "You did." She met his eyes squarely. "You saved my life, Elijah. That is not nothing to me." For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something more, but then he just nodded. "Tomorrow at 7. Tomorrow at 7, she echoed. She watched him mount his horse and ride away, her books clutched to her chest and a smile she could not suppress spreading across her face. Mrs. Crawford was going to tease her mercilessly, but Darla found she did not care. She had a dinner engagement with the most intriguing man she had ever met, and despite the terrifying events of 3 days ago, she felt more alive than she had in months. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Darla taught her students their lessons, but her mind kept wandering to the evening ahead. What would they talk about? What should she wear? She owned only a few nice dresses, and none of them seemed quite right. Mrs. Crawford, sensing her distress, took matters into her own hands. She appeared in Darla's room an hour before Elijah was due to arrive, with a dress of deep green silk draped over her arm. "This was my daughter's," she said, laying it on the bed. "She left it behind when she moved to San Francisco, and I think it will fit you perfectly. The color will bring out your eyes." Darla ran her fingers over the soft fabric. "Mrs. Crawford, I cannot. This is too fine." "Nonsense. It is just sitting in a trunk gathering dust. My Margaret would be happy to see it worn by someone who appreciates it." She gave Darla a gentle push toward the dress. "Now, hurry up and try it on. We need to do something with your hair as well." By the time Elijah knocked on the door at precisely 7 o'clock, Darla barely recognized herself in the mirror. The green dress hugged her figure in all the right places, and Mrs. Crawford had swept her auburn hair up in an elegant style that made her look sophisticated and mature. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, and her eyes sparkled. Elijah's reaction when she came downstairs made all the fussing worthwhile. His eyes widened slightly, and he stared at her for a long moment before remembering his manners. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Thank you." She took in his appearance as well. He had cleaned up nicely, trading his dusty work clothes for a dark suit and a clean white shirt. His hair was neatly combed, and he smelled faintly of soap and something spicy. "You look very handsome yourself." Mrs. Crawford appeared from the parlor, beaming like a proud mother. "You two make a lovely couple. Do not keep her out too late, Mr. Owens." "I will have her home at a respectable hour," Elijah promised, offering Darla his arm. The walk to the Golden Eagle restaurant was pleasant. The evening was warm, but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wild roses from someone's garden. Elijah matched his pace to hers, and they talked easily about simple things: the weather, the new families moving into the area, the upcoming harvest. The restaurant was indeed nothing fancy, but it was clean and welcoming, with checkered tablecloths and candles flickering on each table. The owner, a stout man named Giuseppe, greeted them warmly and showed them to a table by the window. "So," Darla said once they had ordered, "tell me about your ranch. What made you choose Redding?" Elijah leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "I needed a fresh start. After the war, I drifted for a while, working different jobs, never staying in one place too long. But I was tired of wandering. I wanted to build something that was mine, put down roots. The war must have been terrible." "It was." His expression grew distant. "I saw things that no man should see. Did things I am not proud of. When it ended, I did not know who I was anymore." Darla reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You are a good man, Elijah. What you did in the mercantile proves that." He looked down at her hand, then turned his over so their palms touched. "I appreciate you saying that, but sometimes I wonder if the violence will ever leave me, if I will ever be able to be the kind of man a woman like you deserves." "A woman like me?" "Good, kind, pure." He met her eyes. "I am rough around the edges, Darla. I have blood on my hands and scars on my soul. I am not some gentleman from back east with fancy manners and a trust fund." "I do not want a gentleman from back east," Darla said firmly. "I want a man who is honest and brave, a man who stands up for what is right, even when it is dangerous, a man like you." Their food arrived then, breaking the intensity of the moment, but the connection between them had deepened. As they ate, the conversation flowed more naturally. Elijah told her about his childhood in Ohio, about his parents who had died of fever before the war, about his dreams for the ranch. Darla shared stories about her students, about growing up in Sacramento before moving to Redding, about the books she loved to read. "I have always wanted to travel," she confided over dessert. "See the places I have only read about in books. New York, Boston, maybe even Europe someday." "What is stopping you?" She shrugged. "Money, mostly, and I suppose fear. It is a big world out there for a woman alone." "You would not have to be alone," Elijah said quietly. "If you had someone to travel with you." Her heart skipped. "Are you offering to take me to Europe, Elijah Owens?" "Maybe not Europe right away," he said with a small smile. "But there are beautiful places to see right here. the mountains, the coast. I could show you things that would take your breath away." "I would like that," she said softly. After dinner, they walked slowly back to the boarding house, neither wanting the evening to end. The streets were quiet, most people already home for the night. Stars blazed overhead in the clear California sky, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. "I had a wonderful time tonight," Darla said as they reached her front steps. "So did I." Elijah still held her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "May I see you again? I would be disappointed if you did not. Tomorrow is Sunday. Would you allow me to escort you to church and perhaps a picnic afterward?" "That sounds perfect." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and intimate. "Good night, Darla." "Good night, Elijah." She watched from the porch as he walked away, her hand tingling where his lips had touched it. Mrs. Crawford was waiting just inside the door, trying to look like she had not been spying. "Well," she demanded, "how was it?" "It was perfect," Darla sighed, unable to stop smiling. "He is perfect." "I told you he was smitten," Mrs. Crawford said smugly. "And unless I miss my guess, you are just as smitten with him." Darla could not deny it. In the span of less than a week, Elijah Owens had gone from being a stranger to being the person she thought about from the moment she woke until she fell asleep at night. It was fast, maybe too fast, but it felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Darla dressed carefully in her best Sunday dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim. Elijah arrived right on time, looking handsome in his suit, and they walked together to the small white church at the end of Main Street. Their arrival together caused quite a stir. Darla was well known and well liked in Reading, and Elijah was the town's newest hero. As they took their seats in a pew near the middle, she could feel dozens of eyes on them and hear the whispers starting. She ignored them, focusing instead on the warmth of Elijah's presence beside her. The service was pleasant, though Darla found it hard to concentrate on Reverend Thomas's sermon about forgiveness and redemption. Her awareness of Elijah beside her was too distracting, the way his shoulder nearly touched hers, the sound of his voice when they sang hymns together, deep and surprisingly melodic. After the service, they collected the picnic basket that Mrs. Crawford had prepared and walked out to a spot Elijah knew, a meadow about a mile from town with a small creek running through it. The grass was thick and green, dotted with wildflowers, and tall oak trees provided shade from the midday sun. They spread a blanket under one of the oaks and unpacked the basket. Mrs. Crawford had outdone herself with fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and even a small apple pie. They ate and talked, laughing more easily now that they were alone and away from prying eyes. "Tell me something about yourself that no one else knows," Darla said, lying back on the blanket and watching the clouds drift overhead. Elijah stretched out beside her, propping himself up on one elbow. "I am afraid of chickens." Darla burst out laughing. "You are not." "I am," he insisted, grinning. "When I was 6, a rooster chased me around my mother's garden and pecked me on the head. I have been wary of them ever since." "The brave cowboy who faced down 5 outlaws is afraid of chickens," Darla said, still giggling. "That is wonderful." "Your turn," he said. "Tell me a secret." She thought for a moment. "I talk to my father sometimes. Even though he has been dead for 5 years, I still have conversations with him in my head. I tell him about my day, ask him for advice. Sometimes I swear I can hear him answer." Elijah's expression softened. "That is not foolish, Darla. It means you loved him. There is no shame in that." "I worry sometimes that I am going mad." "You are not mad. You are just human." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "We all carry our ghosts with us. The trick is not letting them weigh us down." "Do you carry ghosts?" His smile faded. "Too many. Men I killed in the war. Friends who died beside me. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I can still hear the cannons, still smell the smoke and blood." "I am sorry," Darla said, covering his hand with hers. "That must be awful." "It is getting better. Being here, building something new, it helps." He looked into her eyes. "And meeting you has helped more than you know." The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, Elijah leaned closer. Darla's breath caught in her throat. She could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on her face. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and questioning, not demanding. Darla's eyes fluttered closed, and she kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart beating as fast as hers. The kiss deepened, and she felt something inside her bloom, like one of the wildflowers surrounding them, bright and beautiful and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Elijah rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I have wanted to do that since the moment I saw you in that mercantile," he confessed. "Even with bullets flying and men trying to kill me, I looked at you and thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "I am glad you did not let the bullet stop you," Darla whispered, smiling. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and kissing and simply enjoying each other's company. Darla felt like she was floating, like someone had taken all the weight she had been carrying and lifted it away. This was what it felt like to fall in love, she realized. This lightness, this joy, this sense that the world had suddenly become brighter and more vivid. As the sun began to set, they reluctantly packed up the picnic things and headed back to town. Elijah walked her to her door and kissed her again, longer this time, his arms wrapped around her waist. "I have to go back to the ranch tomorrow," he said, sounding as reluctant as she felt. "But I will come back as soon as I can, maybe in a few days." "I will count every hour," Darla said, only half joking. Over the next 2 weeks, Elijah came to Redding every few days. They took long walks, had more picnics, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. Darla felt herself falling deeper in love with him with each passing day. He was everything she had ever wanted in a man, strong yet gentle, serious yet capable of laughter, damaged but working to heal. The town had accepted them as a couple now, and people smiled when they saw them together. Mrs. Crawford positively glowed with satisfaction, clearly feeling responsible for the romance blooming under her roof. Even the school children had noticed, and Darla had to endure endless questions about her sweetheart. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing at the boarding house, Elijah grew serious. "Darla, I need to tell you something," he began, taking her hand. "I know we have not known each other very long, but I feel like I have been waiting for you my whole life. You have brought light back into a world that had grown dark for me." Darla's heart pounded. "Elijah, let me finish," he said gently. "I am not a wealthy man. The ranch does well enough, but I cannot offer you a mansion or fancy clothes. What I can offer you is a home filled with love, a partner who will stand by your side no matter what, and a life built on honesty and respect." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Darla gasped. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious, but beautiful in its simplicity. "Darla Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled down Darla's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." Elijah slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness that had been building between them. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. "I love you," Elijah said, the words sounding like a vow. "I will love you until my last breath." "I love you too," Darla replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I did not think it was possible to feel this much for another person, but you have shown me it is." They sat together on the swing, wrapped in each other's arms, as the stars came out overhead. Darla rested her head on Elijah's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thought about how strange life could be. A few weeks ago, she had been trapped in a mercantile, certain she was going to die. Now she was engaged to the man who had saved her, planning a future filled with love and happiness. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the same small church where they had sat together that first Sunday. Darla wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Crawford and the other boarding house ladies had helped her make, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers like the ones that had surrounded them during their first picnic. Elijah wore his best suit, and his foreman and ranch hands had come into town to stand up with him. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Reverend Thomas spoke about the mysterious ways that God worked, bringing two people together even in the midst of violence and chaos. When Elijah and Darla exchanged their vows, there was not a dry eye in the church. "I, Elijah Owens, take you, Darla Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Elijah said, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and protect you all the days of my life. You are my heart, my home, my reason for everything." Darla's voice trembled with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "I, Darla Zimmerman, take you, Elijah Owens, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, and stand by your side through whatever may come. You saved my life, and now I give that life to you, freely and completely." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Elijah kissed her with such tenderness that Darla felt her knees go weak. The church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward was held at the Golden Eagle restaurant, with half the town in attendance. Giuseppe had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Darla danced with her new husband, feeling like she was floating on air. Every time she looked at the gold band on her finger, she had to pinch herself to believe it was real. As the evening wound down, Elijah whispered in her ear, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Owens?" Mrs. Owens, she loved the sound of that. "Yes, I am ready." They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon that Elijah had brought, loaded with all of Darla's belongings. The ride to the ranch took about an hour, and Darla snuggled close to her husband, marveling at the word. Husband. She had a husband now. The ranch appeared as the moon rose high in the sky. The house was larger than Darla had expected, a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch and shutters on all the windows. Behind it, she could see the barn and several outbuildings, and beyond that, pastures where cattle grazed. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "It is home," Elijah said. "Our home now?" He helped her down from the wagon, and then, before she could take a step toward the house, he swept her up in his arms. "Elijah!" she laughed. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said, grinning. "It is tradition." He carried her up the porch steps and through the front door, setting her down gently in the entryway. The inside of the house was warm and welcoming, with wooden floors and simple furniture. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I know it is not much," Elijah began, but Darla pressed a finger to his lips. "It is perfect," she said. "Everything is perfect because I am with you." He kissed her then, long and deep, and she felt desire stir in her belly. He lifted her again and carried her up the stairs to the bedroom, where he had prepared everything carefully. Candles glowed softly, and the bed was made up with fresh linens. What followed was tender and passionate, a joining of not just bodies but souls. Elijah was gentle with her, patient and loving, making sure she felt cherished and adored. When they finally lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Darla felt a completeness she had never known before. "I did not know it could be like this," she whispered, tracing patterns on his chest. "I did not know love could feel this overwhelming." "Neither did I," Elijah admitted. "After the war, I thought I was too broken to ever feel this way about anyone. But then you came into my life and changed everything." "We saved each other," Darla said. "You saved me from those outlaws, and I saved you from loneliness and despair." "We saved each other," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and Darla dreamed of a future filled with laughter and children and growing old together. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Darla's life. She threw herself into making the house a home, adding curtains and rugs and little touches that made the space feel lived in and loved. She planted a garden with vegetables and flowers, and she learned how to care for chickens, much to Elijah's amused dismay. She also continued teaching, though now she rode into town 3 days a week instead of living there full-time. The children loved hearing about life on the ranch, and Elijah sometimes came with her, teaching the older boys about ranching and horsemanship. Their love deepened with each passing day. Elijah proved to be an attentive and devoted husband, always making sure Darla felt valued and cherished. They worked side by side, building their life together, and even the hard times felt bearable because they faced them as a team. One evening, about 8 months after their wedding, Darla was preparing dinner when a wave of nausea hit her so hard she had to grip the counter to stay upright. Elijah, who had just come in from checking on the cattle, rushed to her side. "Darla, what is wrong? Are you ill?" She took a deep breath, waiting for the nausea to pass. "I do not know. I have been feeling strange for the past week or so." Elijah's eyes widened. "Strange how?" "Tired, sick to my stomach in the mornings, emotional." She met his gaze and saw the hope dawning there. "Oh, do you think—" "We should send for Doc Peterson," Elijah said, trying to keep his voice calm but failing utterly. "He can tell us for sure." The doctor came the next day and confirmed what they both suspected. Darla was pregnant, about 2 months along if his calculations were correct. Elijah whooped with joy and spun Darla around carefully, mindful of her delicate condition. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." Darla laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed with emotion. "Are you happy?" "Happy? I am the happiest man alive." He knelt down and placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your mama and papa love you very much already." The pregnancy was mostly easy, though Darla tired more easily than usual, and the morning sickness lasted longer than she would have liked. Elijah was wonderful, taking over more of the household chores and making sure she rested. He read to her in the evenings, his hand always resting protectively on her growing belly. As her due date approached, Elijah became increasingly nervous. He checked on her constantly, worried about every little thing. Darla found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure. "I am fine," she kept assuring him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife having my baby," he countered. "That is different." When her labor finally began on a warm September evening in 1882, Elijah nearly panicked. He rode to town at breakneck speed to fetch Doc Peterson, and then paced the floor downstairs while the doctor and Mrs. Crawford, who had insisted on coming to help, attended to Darla upstairs. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the next day. Elijah could hear Darla's cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He wanted to be with her, holding her hand, but the doctor had insisted he stay out of the room. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, a new sound filled the house. The thin, reedy wail of a newborn baby. Elijah was up the stairs in seconds, bursting into the bedroom. Darla lay propped up against the pillows, exhausted but glowing. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. Doc Peterson stood nearby, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Owens," he said. "You have a son." A son. Elijah approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. Darla smiled up at him and pulled back the blanket so he could see the baby's face. He was red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. "He is perfect," Elijah whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his, gripping with surprising strength. "He is absolutely perfect." "Meet your papa, little one," Darla said softly. "This is the man who saved my life so that you could come into this world." Elijah sat carefully on the edge of the bed, unable to take his eyes off his son. "Thank you," he said to Darla, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything." "We made him together," Darla said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "He is our miracle." They named him Thomas, after Darla's father, with the middle name James, after Elijah's father. Little Thomas Owens was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an appetite that kept Darla busy. Elijah proved to be a doting father, always eager to hold his son and sing to him in his deep voice. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch prospered, and Elijah hired another hand to help with the work so he could spend more time with his family. Darla continued teaching part-time, bringing Thomas with her when he was old enough. The children in her class adored having a baby to fuss over. 2 years later, Darla gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, with long auburn hair like her mother's and dark eyes like her father's. Thomas was a protective big brother from the start, always wanting to help take care of his baby sister. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Elijah's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to expand, buying more land and increasing their herd. They never became wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. The years passed quickly, marked by birthdays and holidays and the simple joys of family life. Thomas grew into a strong, serious boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Elizabeth was creative and spirited, always getting into some kind of mischief, but charming her way out of trouble with her bright smile. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Elijah surprised Darla with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Mrs. Crawford, who had become like a grandmother to them, and spent 3 glorious days exploring the city. Darla marveled at the buildings and the bustling streets, so different from quiet Reading. "You said you wanted to travel," Elijah reminded her as they stood on a hill overlooking the bay. "See new places." "This is wonderful," Darla said, leaning into his embrace. "But honestly, Elijah, as long as I am with you, I am home. It does not matter where we are." "I love you, Darla Owens," he said, tilting her chin up to kiss her. "More today than the day I married you, and I will love you even more tomorrow." "I love you too," she replied. "You are still my hero, the man who fought his way through danger to save me. Only now you save me every day in 100 small ways." They returned to the ranch refreshed and renewed, eager to see their children. Thomas and Elizabeth came running when they saw the wagon approach, shouting with excitement. Elijah scooped them both up, one in each arm, while Darla laughed at the picture they made. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Darla and Elijah sat on the porch swing, watching the stars come out. It was the same swing that Elijah had installed shortly after they married, and they had spent countless evenings here over the years, talking and planning and simply being together. "Do you ever think about that day in the mercantile?" Darla asked, "when you came crashing in to save me?" "Sometimes," Elijah admitted. "I think about how different my life would be if I had not been in town that day. If I had decided to come the next week instead, or if I had not heard the shooting. I think about it too. About how close I came to dying, and how you appeared like an answer to a prayer I did not even have time to say." "I was so afraid," Elijah confessed. "When I realized you were trapped in there with those men, I was more terrified than I had ever been in the war, because I knew, even then, that you were going to be important to me. I could feel it." "Love at first sight?" Darla teased gently. "Something like that. Or maybe love at first rescue." He pulled her closer. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Fight through 100 men if it meant keeping you safe." "My fierce protector," Darla murmured, kissing his cheek. "But I do not need you to fight for me anymore. Now we just get to live, you and me and our beautiful children." "Living with you is the greatest adventure of all," Elijah said. 3 more children came in, the years that followed. Another boy named Samuel, who had his mother's quick mind and love of books. Then twin girls, Rose and Lucy, who kept everyone on their toes with their identical faces and different personalities. The house that had once felt too large and empty was now filled with laughter and noise and love. Darla eventually stopped teaching at the school to focus on her growing family, but she never stopped educating. She taught all her children to read and write, filled their heads with stories and knowledge, and encouraged them to question and explore. Elijah taught them about the land, about animals and weather, and the value of hard work. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, how their father had saved their mother from dangerous men, and how that terrifying day had led to a love that built a family and a legacy. Thomas, the oldest, would tell his siblings that their father was the bravest man who ever lived, and Elijah would shake his head and say that loving their mother and raising good children was the bravest thing he had ever done. As the years turned into decades, Reading grew and changed. The wild, rough, and tumble town of the early 1880s gave way to a more settled community, with paved streets and streetlights. The railroad came through in 1892, bringing new opportunities and new people. But through all the changes, the Owens Ranch remained a constant, a place of stability and love. Elijah's hair turned silver at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes, but to Darla, he was as handsome as the day he walked into that mercantile. Darla's auburn hair gained streaks of white, and her figure softened with the years and the children she had borne. But to Elijah, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. All 5 of their children were there, now grown with families of their own. Thomas had taken over most of the ranch operations and lived with his wife and 3 children in a house built on the northern part of the property. Elizabeth had married a banker in Reading and had 2 daughters. Samuel was a lawyer in San Francisco, but came home often. Rose had married a local merchant, and Lucy was engaged to a doctor from Sacramento. As Darla looked around at the gathering, at her children and grandchildren and friends, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Her life had been full and rich, filled with love and purpose, and it all started because a brave cowboy had fought his way through danger to save her. "What are you thinking about?" Elijah asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just about how blessed we are," Darla said, leaning back against him. "How everything worked out exactly as it was meant to." "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were mine to protect," Elijah said. "And then you became mine to love. Best decision I ever made, rushing into that mercantile. Best thing that ever happened to me, being trapped by those outlaws," Darla said, then laughed. "I never thought I would say that, but it is true. If it had not happened, I would never have met you." "God works in mysterious ways," Elijah quoted, "bringing good out of evil, light out of darkness." Their oldest granddaughter, Mary, ran up to them, her pigtails flying. "Grandma, Grandpa, come cut the cake." They walked hand in hand to the table where a large cake sat, decorated with white frosting and 30 candles. Their children gathered around, along with their spouses and the grandchildren, all smiling and happy. "Speech!" Thomas called out, and the others took up the cry. Elijah held up his hands for quiet. "I am not much for speeches," he began, "but I will say this. 30 years ago, I married the woman of my dreams. She has given me 5 wonderful children, 11 grandchildren so far, and more happiness than any man deserves. Every day with her has been a gift, and I thank God for bringing her into my life." Darla wiped tears from her eyes. "And I am grateful every day for a man who was brave enough to fight for me, strong enough to build a life with me, and gentle enough to love me through all our years together. You are my heart, Elijah Owens, now and forever." They kissed, and their family applauded and cheered. Then they cut the cake together, their hands joined on the knife, just as they had been joined in everything for 30 years. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Elijah and Darla sat on their porch swing one more time. The party had wound down, and the family was inside cleaning up and getting the children ready for bed. "We should probably go help," Darla said, but she made no move to get up. "They can manage without us for a few minutes," Elijah replied, pulling her closer. "I want to sit here with my beautiful wife and watch the sun set." So they sat, wrapped in each other's arms, and watched the day end. The ranch land stretched out before them, peaceful and productive, a testament to their years of hard work. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed, and closer, they could hear their grandchildren laughing inside the house. "Do you have any regrets?" Darla asked softly. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Elijah thought about it seriously before answering. "No, not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you, to this life, to this moment. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same way," Darla said. "Even the scary parts, even the hard times, they were all worth it because they brought us here." "Here," Elijah echoed, "home, with the woman I love and the family we built together." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. The Wild West, that had once been their home, had been tamed and settled, but their love remained as wild and passionate as it had been that first day when a cowboy fought his way through danger to save a trapped woman. Years continued to pass gently on the ranch. Elijah and Darla grew older together with grace, their love deepening with each season that turned. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, respected in the community and adored by their descendants. Every Sunday, the family gathered for dinner at the main house, filling it with noise and laughter and the chaos that comes with multiple generations under one roof. Darla still kept a beautiful garden, though now she had help from her granddaughters, teaching them which herbs to plant and how to coax the best blooms from roses. Elijah still rode out to check on the cattle most mornings, though Thomas handled most of the actual work now. They had earned their rest, but neither was content to sit idle. On quiet evenings, they would often sit together on the porch, and Elijah would read aloud to Darla from whatever book she had chosen, his voice still strong and steady. Or they would simply talk, reminiscing about their life together, marveling at how far they had come from that terrifying day in the mercantile. "Do you remember when Thomas was born?" Darla asked one evening. "How nervous you were." Elijah chuckled. "I thought I was going to wear a hole in the floor with all my pacing. I have faced armed men without flinching, but the sound of you in pain nearly broke me. And then you held him for the first time, and you cried." "I did not cry," Elijah protested, but his smile gave him away. "I might have gotten a little misty-eyed." "You sobbed like a baby," Darla teased, poking him gently in the ribs, "and it was the sweetest thing I had ever seen." They laughed together, the easy laughter of two people who knew each other completely and loved each other anyway. As the moon rose over the ranch, casting silver light across the land, they held hands and counted their blessings. More grandchildren came, and then great-grandchildren, each one welcomed with joy into the growing family. The Owens Ranch became known throughout Northern California for its quality cattle and its even better reputation. Elijah had built something that would last long after he was gone, a legacy of hard work and integrity. But more than the ranch, more than the land or the cattle or the prosperity, what Elijah and Darla were most proud of was the love they had nurtured. They had shown their children what a real marriage looked like, what partnership and devotion meant, and their children, in turn, were passing those lessons on to their own children. When Elijah turned 65, the family threw him a surprise birthday party. Nearly 100 people showed up, friends and neighbors and family from all over California. There were speeches and toasts, and Thomas presented his father with a beautiful saddle, hand-tooled with the Owens brand. "You have taught me everything I know about being a man," Thomas said, his voice choked with emotion. "How to work hard, how to treat people with respect, how to love a woman the way she deserves to be loved. I hope I can be half the man you are." Elijah embraced his son tightly, pride and love shining in his eyes. "You already are, son. You already are." That night, after everyone had gone home and the ranch was quiet again, Darla found Elijah sitting alone in his study, staring at an old photograph. It was from their wedding day, the two of them standing together in front of the church, looking impossibly young and hopeful. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his. "About that day," he said quietly. "About how scared I was walking into that mercantile, not knowing if I would walk back out. About how I looked at you, trapped and terrified, and knew that saving you was the most important thing I would ever do." "You did save me," Darla said, taking his hand. "In every way a person can be saved. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Elijah corrected, raising her hand to his lips. "I was a broken man before I met you, Darla, haunted by the war, by all the violence I had seen and done. But you healed me. Your love made me whole again." "We healed each other," Darla whispered. "Two wounded people finding each other and becoming stronger together than we ever could have been apart." They sat together in the study, holding hands and looking at old photographs, remembering their journey together. From that terrifying day in the mercantile to building a ranch and raising a family, from young love to the deep, abiding affection of a lifetime together. Every moment, good and bad, had led them here, to this place of contentment and peace. As they prepared for bed that night, moving through the familiar routine they had performed thousands of times, Elijah caught Darla's reflection in the mirror. Even after all these years, the sight of her still made his heart skip a beat. Her hair was white now, her face lined with the passage of time, but to him, she was still the beautiful woman he had fallen in love with in a single moment. "I love you, Darla Owens," he said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." "And I love you, Elijah Owens," she replied, leaning back against him. "My cowboy, my hero, my heart." They climbed into bed together, as they had done for decades, and fell asleep in each other's arms. Outside, the California night was peaceful, the stars bright overhead, and the ranch they had built together rested quietly under the watchful eye of the moon. The years continued their gentle march, bringing changes both expected and unexpected. Elizabeth's husband passed away suddenly, and she moved back to the ranch with her daughters, grateful for the comfort of family. Samuel's law practice flourished, and he became a judge, known for his fairness and wisdom. Rose and her husband opened a general store in Redding that became the heart of the community. Lucy and her doctor husband established a practice in Sacramento, but came home often, especially when Darla's health began to decline. At 75, Darla was diagnosed with a heart condition that left her weak and tired. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, that she had lived a full life and should make the most of whatever time remained. Elijah refused to accept it at first, riding into town daily to consult with different doctors, looking for some cure or treatment. But eventually, even he had to acknowledge the truth. "I am not afraid," Darla told him one evening as they sat together in their bedroom. "I have lived a beautiful life. full of love and joy. I have no regrets. I am afraid, Elijah admitted, his voice breaking. I am terrified of losing you. I do not know how to exist in a world without you in it. Darla cupped his face in her hands, looking into the dark eyes she loved so much. You will go on because our children need you, because our grandchildren need you. You will go on because that is what we do. We keep living, keep loving, keep honoring the time we had together. I do not want to, Elijah said, tears streaming down his weathered face. I want to be with you wherever you go. And someday you will be, Darla promised. But not yet. Not until you have lived out the rest of your days, loved our family, and made sure our legacy continues. Promise me, Elijah. Promise me you will not give up when I am gone. He held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. I promise, he whispered, but know that every day without you will be the hardest thing I have ever endured. 2 months later, on a warm spring morning, very much like the one when they first met, Darla Owens passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her husband and her 5 children. She was 75 years old, and she died as she had lived, with grace and love. The funeral was held in the same church where they had married 47 years earlier. Reverend Thomas's grandson, now the minister, spoke about Darla's life of service and love, about how she had touched so many lives through her teaching and her kindness. But it was Elijah who gave the most moving tribute. My wife was the bravest person I ever knew, he said, his voice steady despite the grief that threatened to overwhelm him. She faced death once, trapped by violent men with no way out, and she did not break. She faced life with that same courage, taking on every challenge with strength and faith. She made me a better man just by loving me. She gave me a family and a purpose. And even though she is gone from this world, she will never be gone from my heart. The family buried Darla in a small cemetery on the ranch, under an oak tree that overlooked the meadow where Elijah had first kissed her all those years ago. Her gravestone was simple, reading, Darla Zimmerman Owens, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She loved fearlessly and lived fully. In the weeks and months that followed, Elijah struggled with grief. The house felt empty without Darla's presence, even though it was still filled with family. He would catch himself turning to tell her something, only to remember she was not there. At night, the bed felt too large and too cold, but he kept his promise to her. He continued to work on the ranch, to spend time with his children and grandchildren, to live. One evening, about 6 months after Darla's death, Elijah was sitting on the porch swing when his grandson Peter came to sit beside him. Peter was Thomas's youngest son, a thoughtful boy of 16, who reminded Elijah strongly of himself at that age. "Grandpa," Peter said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," Elijah replied. "How did you do it? How did you keep going after Grandma died? It seems like it would be impossible." Elijah was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "It was impossible at first," he admitted. "For weeks, maybe months, I just went through the motions of living without really being alive. But then I realized something. Your grandmother gave me 47 years of her life, 47 years of love and laughter and joy. And she would be furious if I wasted whatever time I have left being miserable. So I decided to honor her by living the way she would want me to live, by loving our family the way she taught me to love. Do you still miss her?" "Every single day," Elijah said, his voice rough. "Every moment. But I also carry her with me in everything I do. She is in the garden she planted, in the house we built, in every one of our children and grandchildren. She is not truly gone as long as we remember her and live by the values she taught us." Peter nodded thoughtfully. "I want a love like you and Grandma had someday, the kind that lasts forever. Then be brave enough to fight for it when you find it," Elijah advised. "Love like that does not just happen. You have to work at it every day, choose it every day, protect it every day. But it is worth every bit of effort." Elijah lived for 5 more years after Darla's death, years he filled with his family and his work. He saw more great-grandchildren born, saw the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's leadership, and saw his younger children all settled and happy in their lives. He was present and engaged, a patriarch who was loved and respected by everyone who knew him. But everyone could see that part of him was missing, the part that Darla had taken with her when she died. He was like a tree that had lost its companion, still standing strong but leaning slightly toward the empty space where she used to be. On a spring morning in 1913, Elijah woke up and knew it was his last day. He was not in pain, was not particularly ill, but he could feel it in his bones. He called his children to him one by one, told them he loved them, and made sure they knew how proud he was of each of them. Then, as the sun was setting, he asked Thomas to help him out to the porch swing. "I want to watch one more sunset," he said. "Your mother loved the sunsets from this porch." Thomas settled his father on the swing and sat beside him, holding his hand. The rest of the family gathered on the porch, understanding without being told that they were saying goodbye. As the sky turned gold and orange and pink, Elijah closed his eyes and smiled. "I am coming, Darla," he whispered. "I kept my promise. I lived out my days. Now, I am ready to be with you again." And with his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren surrounding him, with the ranch he had built stretching out in every direction, Elijah Owens took his last breath and left this world to join his beloved wife in the next. They buried him beside Darla under the oak tree, his gravestone matching hers. Elijah Owens, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He fought bravely and loved fiercely. Between their two stones, the family planted a rosebush that bloomed every spring with deep red flowers, a symbol of the love that had joined them in life and in death. The story of Elijah and Darla became family legend, passed down through generations. Their great-great-grandchildren would visit the ranch and hear about the day a cowboy fought his way through danger to save a trapped woman, and how that act of courage led to a love story that built a legacy. The ranch continued to operate, managed by Elijah and Darla's descendants, a living testament to what they had created together. On the porch of the main house, the swing where they had spent so many evenings together still hung, weathered by time, but still sturdy. And on warm spring evenings, when the light was just right, some family members swore they could see two figures sitting there, holding hands and watching the sunset together, finally reunited after years apart. The tale of their love became more than just a family story. It became a reminder that even in the midst of violence and danger, love could bloom. That courage was not just about fighting, but about opening your heart to another person, that two wounded souls could find each other and create something beautiful and lasting. Their children all lived long, full lives, passing on the lessons they had learned from their parents. They taught their own children about integrity, hard work, and above all, love. The Owens name became synonymous with those values throughout Northern California, a reputation that lasted for generations. The ranch itself eventually became a historical landmark, preserved by the family as a tribute to Elijah and Darla. Visitors could tour the house and see where they lived, the furniture they had chosen together, the photographs that lined the walls documenting their life. The story of the mercantile rescue was told and retold, sometimes embellished but always true at its core. The story of a cowboy who had saved a woman and then given her his heart. In the small cemetery under the oak tree, the rose bush between their graves grew larger and stronger with each passing year, its blooms a vivid splash of color against the green grass. Local people said it was the most beautiful rose bush they had ever seen, that it never failed to bloom, no matter how harsh the winter or how dry the summer. It was as if the love between Elijah and Darla was so strong, it kept the plant thriving, a living symbol of their enduring bond. And so, their story ended where it began, with courage and love and the understanding that sometimes the most terrifying moments in our lives can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. She had been trapped with men cutting off her every exit, and he had fought his way through to save her. But in the end, they had saved each other, building a life together that stood as a testament to the power of love to overcome any obstacle, survive any trial, and last, beyond death itself, into eternity.